Let's talk about 3 different ways to provide styles. We can use embedded style sheets, which is what we have been doing so far. So we embed or include our styles in our HTML documents. We can also use external style sheets, which means we can write our styles in separate files. This has a couple of benefits, which we're going to talk about in a second. And we can also use inline styles, and with this, we can apply a style directly to a particular HTML element. So in this lesson, I'm going to start by creating a paragraph with 5 words. Now let's duplicate it so we have a couple of elements to work with. Next, we go to the style element and define a rule for our paragraphs. I'm going to set the color to orange, and with this, we get 2 orange paragraphs. Now, what we have here is an embedded style sheet. There are 2 problems with these style sheets. The first problem is that they're not scalable. So if we have multiple pages, it is likely that on other pages, we want our paragraphs to be orange. With this approach, we have to copy all the styles that we have here and put them on every single web page. And that means if tomorrow we decide to change the color of our paragraphs, we have to go to every single web page and make modifications. So this approach is not scalable. The second problem with this approach is that it violates a very important principle in computer science called separation of concerns. So we want to have different modules for different concerns. As we have learned so far, we use HTML to structure our web pages, and we use CSS to style them. These are 2 different concerns, so we should separate them. Let me give you a metaphor. Think of a supermarket. In a supermarket, we have different sections for different types of products. We have a section for fruits and vegetables and another section for cleaning products. Now imagine if you had a supermarket with only a single section. All the products were in a single section. We could never find anything in that supermarket, right? So we want to organize our code like a well-organized supermarket. This is where we use external style sheets. So we can take all these styles and put them in a separate file. So in this project, I'm going to create a new file called styles.css. We could call it anything. The name doesn't matter. But styles is a pretty common name. What matters is that the extension should be CSS. Okay? Now, let's go to index.html and copy our CSS rule. Well, I'm going to cut it and then paste it over here. So I only moved the CSS rule, not the style element, okay? Now, let's save the changes. Back in index.html, we can get rid of the style element and instead link this HTML document to our external style sheet. To do that, we use the link element. So link tab. This element has 2 attributes, rel or relationship, which determines the type of resource we're linking this document to. In this case, a style sheet. The second attribute is href, which you already know about, right? So here we can type a relative or an absolute URL. In this case, I'm going to go with the relative URL. So we're currently on index.html, and our external style sheet is in the same folder. So here we can type styles.css. Now save the changes. We get the same result as before. Now one thing I want to clarify here. This link element is what we call a self-closing element. So as you can see, here we don't have opening and closing tags. We have a single tag, which is self-closed over here. The alternative way to write this is to open it first and then close it manually. But this makes our code a little bit longer. So by default, VS Code generates a self-closing tag like this. That is better. So does it mean we should never use embedded styles? No. Sometimes we want to overwrite the styles that are defined in an external style sheet. For example, let's say on this web page only, we want to change the color of our paragraphs. So we add a style element and define a new rule for our paragraph elements. Here we can set the color to black. And now, look, our paragraphs are black. So the rules that we define here overwrite the rules defined in an external style sheet, okay? So these are 2 different ways to provide styles, but there is a third way. We can use inline styles to apply styles to a particular HTML element. So let's say out of these 2 paragraphs, I want to make the first paragraph blue, but only the first paragraph. Every HTML element has a style attribute, and this is where we can write 1 or more styles. So we can set the color to blue, add a semicolon, so we can type a second CSS declaration. So we can set font weight to bold. Now don't worry about these styles, we'll talk about them later. Now, let's look at the result. So the first paragraph is blue and bold. What we have here is an example of an inline style. Now, inline styles are pretty ugly. You should avoid them as much as possible because they violate the separation of concern principle. We're defining some styles in the middle of our markup. But what if we really want to make the first paragraph bold and blue? Well, there are better ways. For example, we can give this paragraph a unique identifier. So we set the ID to first, and then over here, we define a rule for our first paragraph. So we'll start our rule with a pound sign, and then we type the ID of our element. Now, the styles that we define here will only be applied to an element with this identifier. So now we can take these two styles and move them over here. Okay, and then we can get rid of the inline style. Now we have better separation of concerns.